told your friend you're not okay? And tell me what's wrong and why you never said you felt that way. And guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away. But I've known you too long, it hurts to watch your blue eyes fade to gray as you fade away, as you fade away.
Yeah, I'm about to fade away, cause every time I wake up I feel like it's Monday. Something's going wrong with all the chemicals up in my brain. All of a sudden I don't look at anything the same way. Got a buildup of my thoughts sitting in an ashtray. I'm sorry that I'm so inconvenient, okay? Just let me be me and I'll stay out of your way. I can see the way you look at me, I'm such a disgrace. I never really asked to be brought into this place. You wanna love me? Well then baby, have a taste. All the highs and the lows, no, you'll never be the same. I don't really wanna hurt you, but I can't control the pain. If you're sticking by my side, maybe we could be okay. Okay, maybe you could be the change I need today. I promise that I've never felt this way. I really hope that you will choose to stay through all the pain.
I know you told your friend you're not okay. And tell me what's
Get out of the Christmas tree. No, get out of the Christmas tree. What are you doing? No, don't yawn. Come here. Come on. Get out. Claire? Oh, sorry, guys. My cat decided she's going to go in the damn Christmas tree. You're not a present, honey. Wow, I love cats. Anyways, hey, Tammy Sue. Hey, Cool Gamer. So I'm just going to be reading this book that I did start. I'm serious. She's stuck in the mouse wire. She can't. No, wait. Oh, okay. Go see your brother. Oh my God. Okay, anyway, so that was fun. Wah. Here, come on up here. Here. Why you being a bad girl? Hey, why you being a bad girl? All right, I'm just gonna start reading this. All right, we're on chapter 3. And this is titled, The Story Hits the Paper. Later on Sunday, come on. Later on Sunday, I was surprised to hear Ray's voices coming from my parents' bedroom. It was quite a contrast to the dim and quiet I had experienced earlier, and Dad's voice sounded more robust, almost like his normal self. Mom and Dad were having a heated discussion. Not exactly an argument, but it sounded serious enough for me to slink up the basement stairs to my listening post. At full speed, Polish, like so many European languages, take on heightened intensity and volume. My mother was clearly not willing to budge on her belief that what my father was proposing was not in anyone's best interests. For his part, Dad was arguing a moral position, stating that it was a duty and obligation to report what he had seen and the events that followed. What had he seen? And why would he argue that he was obligated to report it? And to whom? The discussion ended, as so many did in our house, in mutual silence. Her heavy footsteps coming my way made me slip down the stairs before I could get caught. I heard her rummaging for the phone book in the entrance hall, then returned to the bedroom with the phone, dragging the floor's extension cord along the hardwood floors. Who they called and why was a mystery. From the basement, I could hear voices but no conversation. I just knew that Dad was on the phone for a very long time. Shh. I didn't even say your name today. Shh. Later that evening, the doorbell rang. My mother answered, and there was some brief small talk at the door, a woman's voice. Then another voice joined in, a man's. Together they trooped down the hall and into my parents' bedroom. When Mom came downstairs to get me ready for bed, I knew that I would not be eavesdropping with her on guard. It felt as though she was keeping me away from the people in her bedroom. I didn't ask, she didn't. tell. I fell asleep hearing the murmur of voices from upstairs. Holiday Monday dawned for me as it did for every school age kid, happy not to be going to school and ready for whatever would come. When I checked with Dad, I found him to be as weak as before, but with a slightly brighter disposition. He was still having trouble with his solid food, so Mom had him drinking chicken broth from a mug. It was something, but I didn't think a man like my dad would be able to carry on for long without eating. The room still had a peculiar odor, remnants of what I had smelled yesterday, but Mom attempted to clear the air by opening the bedroom window and letting in the spring breeze. As for last night's visitors, neither spoke a word about who they were or what they discussed. Mom came and went, checking on Dad's progress with the broth and reminding him of when he was to take his next pill. I didn't know what they were, but the pills seemed to make him drowsy. The label on the bottle announced that they were from a hospital. I can't even pronounce that name. Misericordia Hospital. So I assumed he had got them on Saturday evening. After a brief discussion about Dad seeing our family doctor, my mother hustled me out of the bedroom to give Dad a chance to rest. As usual, Mark was enlisted to chauffeur Dad to our family's doctor's office. On the return, the pills Dad had received from the Misericordia was discarded from the nightstand, and my mother replaced them with two new bottles, both with the name of Dr. Oatway, our family doctor. In later years, Mom's kept identical journal of her own health and every single interaction with the medical community. Each medication she had been prescribed, and every procedure or test was duly noted in a diary in great detail. While a lot of it was noted in Polish, the diary became an incredible guide for medical staff each time she had to go to the hospital. In some cases, I'm willing to bet the notes were lifesavers. It's difficult to remember exactly when she began this habit, but I believe it was prompted by Dad's case. After settling Dad in bed, she started a chat of his medications. She started a chart, sorry, of his medications, noted his weight, and began to describe his daily intake of food and fluids, how many times and how much he urinated, and whether or not he was able to produce a stool. I marveled at her attention to detail, and weeks later, I noted the chart covered several handwritten pages. She was then and continued to be until his death in 1999 a very efficient nurse. 9-year-olds don't read newspapers, at least none of the 9-year-olds I knew. And I was certainly no different. Up to that point, the newspaper for adults, as I got the news that they deemed a 9-year-old should know. We had a black and white TV with rabbit ears on a rolling cart so that we could set it up almost in any room. Occasionally, especially Sunday evening, we watched TV together as a family. As for the news, that was not interesting to me. Imagine my surprise when the afternoon edition of Winnipeg Tribune arrived with the story, "I was burned by UFO." Hey, Amanda. Yeah, that's crazy. So imagine my surprise, this 9-year-old, when the afternoon edition of Winnipeg Tribune arrived at the story, "I was burned by a UFO," across the top of the paper with a photo of my father holding his pajama top open to reveal a pattern of dark dots across his upper chest. And that is the photo right here that I have here in the background. And it's a square of, what is it? 4 by 5, I think. 4 across, 5 down. It looks like 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Yeah, 4 across, 5 down. It's like a patch, just burnt holes. And he still has radiation from this. The reporter was Heather Chisvin, and I gathered that it was her voice I heard last night from the front hall. Mom tried to keep the paper from me, but it was being passed back and forth among her, my brother and sister. When I could bear it no longer, all my questions came pouring out. In the style I would recognize for years to come, Mom nearly nodded towards the bedroom and told me to ask my father to explain. He told me the story, and I'm sure he left out many pertinent details, but he covered enough ground that I formed a picture in my head of what he was telling me. My 9-year-old imagination saw this UFO as a spaceship, piloted by aliens that had landed in the woods, burned my father, and disappeared. A spaceship, the acronym explained. It was an unidentified flying object, but it just had to be a flying saucer, didn't it? What else did it look like? What else looked like pictures I saw in those newspapers by the checkouts at the local Safeway store? What else could it be, but the subject of so many science fiction comments and books and movies and TV shows? I peppered my father with questions about size, shape, sound, anything that would make the story more real to me. At no time did I doubt his tale. He was my father after all, and I had never been given any opportunity to doubt that this man, who was a war hero to me, would be anything but forthright. He showed me the burns on his chest, an angry red patch of blisters and with scorched hair and a pattern of dark red dots as large as coins marching across his abdomen. He showed me the sketch he had made with all of his notes. Oh, yes, I could practically see the visitors stepping out and asking Dad to take them to his leader. He answered all my questions, and I would have asked more had Mom not come in and pointed out that he was growing weaker by the moment and that his hoarse voice should be a clue that he had said enough for one day. As I was shooed out of the door, I was struck by one very odd exemption from the conversation. At no point in our chat did he say that he believed the craft to be from another world, even though my boyish imagination had already come to that conclusion. When I pushed him to declare what he thought he saw, he would only say, "You tell me." My brother Mark had been in their air cadets in Regina. Being 10 years younger, I got to imagine myself in his shoes when I grew up. Naturally, his love of aviation became mine, something I carry to this day. We both marveled at the world of aeroscience science and technology. He made scale models and put on his air cadet uniform once a week while I mimicked his paramilitary bearing. As often shared at the latest aviation news with me, he often shared it, showing me photos with the newest jet aircraft. I remember going to Mark to the corner store in Regina to buy creamsicles because inside every creamsicle wrapper was an aviation collector card. I ate a lot of creamsicles and collected a lot of cards. I love the taste. In all the enthusiasm about aviation, not once did I hear any discussion about the possibility of UFOs, nor did the family follow with any interest the stories that started to appear regular in newspapers and magazines, probably as far as back in time as the Roswell incident in 1947. The very thought of UFOs belonged in the realm of science fiction. It was the stuff of Flash Gordon, War of the Worlds, and pulp novels. Nobody in our family gave it a second thought. Hey, that high guy. Yeah, you'd like this story. It's a great story. Now science fiction had arrived at our very doorstep. It was come bustling in my parents' bedroom. It had left a mark on my father, and as these things go, it would mark our family for decades. Pandora's box had been opened because my father believed in a gesture of civic responsibility. It was something he and my mother would regret in years to come. We were naive to think that a simple newspaper article would be the end of it. And, as it turned out, my father's trusting nature was his undoing. It would lead to years of frustration and forever change his character. And it would test the rest of us like nothing else we had ever or would ever encounter in a way that UFO did burn us all. Chapter 4, The Bullying Begins. I couldn't imagine what this man went through and the pain. He died in 1999. I don't know what from, though. I have to read on and find out. Having to go to school, I missed a lot of activity at the house over the next few weeks until summer break. I never guessed that a simple newspaper article would start such a storm, but I caught the first sprinkle of the showers to come almost as soon as I had returned to class. I had changed schools and was now in grade 3 at St. John Breerbooth School, where I would remain until 8th grade. The tough guys of the 3rd grade singled me out during the very first recess of the day. They taunted me with questions to confirm that I was indeed the son of the UFO guy. Then they carried on to bring any number of details into the rant, including that I was a Polak and that my immigrant father was a janitor at a cement factory. They held me down and tried to pull up my jacket to see if I had green alien skin, and despite my struggles, I couldn't protect myself. My savior on this day was my 3rd grade teacher, Marjorie Smith, sorry, who was out on recess duty patrolling the schoolyard with an ever-present gaggle of girls surrounding her. Some teachers stand out. I had a few at this elementary school whom I remembered with considerable fondness decades later. One of them was Marjorie Smith, scattering the bullies from her like St. Patrick and the snakes. Miss Smith collected me, shooed away her gaggle, and took me aside to an empty classroom where we sat and chatted while I cried, not from pain, but from embarrassment. This was one of my favorite of all stories. So much information on this one, right? I don't know. Have you read this book at all? Sorry. It's called When They Appeared. And it's written by the son, it's not written by Stephen, the man laying here. It's written by his son, Stan. Stan McCulloch and Chris Rutkowski. And there's also an original story in this too. It's called My Encounter with the UFO by Stephen McCulloch, and that was the father, the one that it happened to. Not only had I gone from acceptable to prior one day in one day, I had been unable to stand up for myself, and to top all horrors, the girl I liked was in Mrs. Smith's orbit and witnessed my shame when the group came by. Mrs. Smith was familiar with the story in the paper and promised to be there for me whenever I needed her at the school. As it turned out, she not only watched over me, she became a good friend to my mother and remained so for many years, long after I left to go on to high school. In many ways, she was responsible for allowing me to keep a measure of dignity that gave me the incentive to continue in that school. I needed that because I would continue to be bullied on my way to and from school, where even the long arms of Mrs. Smith couldn't reach. So sad. I get it. Kids don't understand. Kids are bullies, but I wish it would stop. It leads to so much agony for people when they're bullied when they're young. Some of them turn into monsters. Hey, ST. Some of them, they become the bully, the monster. And some of them are just so damn scared that they can't even continue their life, or you know what I mean? I returned home that afternoon, keeping a wary eye on any ambushes along the way, to find two strange men at the door. They were talking with Mark, who obviously was not letting them in. I quickly passed by through the gate and inside the side door to hear the end of the conversation. The men were from the newspaper, although I don't recall which one. Mark had politely but firmly denied them a chance to talk with Dad. It was not the first visit from the reporters that he deflected. Hey, Triple, you're cutting potatoes? I just got back from grocery shopping. It's like every Saturday or every Sunday. Every weekend I have to go shopping. I don't know, I just feel like, I don't know. Things are so damn expensive. I even went to the dollar store first because they sell like Frosted Flakes and Fruit Loops, snacks for school and all that stuff really cheap. So I went there, and still I spent $80 at Dollarama. And then I went to the grocery store and that was 126. Then I went to Canadian Tire because their cat food is the best throughout all this town. They've got so many different selections. And my cats really love the canned pate. So I went and I got 20 cans for $20. It was cheaper there too. So yeah, almost $200 today. But it'll keep us going for a while. I learned that it had been a busy day at the house. A man identifying himself as a representative of the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, ARPO, nope, APRO, in the United States had called ahead and spent the morning with Dad discussing the events of May 20th. His name was Barry Thompson, and his card indicated that he was with CAPRO, the Canadian wing of APRO. Nobody we knew had ever heard of such an organization, but it appeared that this group had long been following the various sightings and reports of UFO activity, not only in America, but also around the world. I never heard of this one. APRO, Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization. The other one is Canadian Wing of Aerial Phenomenon. Wow. So they've been they've been following various sightings and reports of UFO activity, not only in America but also around the world. Thompson would become a regular visitor, and he inserted himself whenever possible into the investigative events to come. We could not know at the time, but the legacy of Barry Thompson would do more harm than good. Later that morning, the RCMP showed up. Mark ushered in two men, Corporal Davis and Constable Zacharias. I missed the chance to hear what he said, although my eavesdropping that evening produced some solid results as Mom and Dad compared notes about the events of the day. According to Mom, the officer seemed polite and basically wanted to check on the report that had been filed by the constable's sorry, Solot Key. Such strange names. Yay, aliens! Hey, Avocado. Solot Key. Okay. Or Solotki. I don't know how to pronounce that. Constable Solotki, we'll say. An RCMP officer from the Falcon Beach detachment who had met Dad on the highway immediately following the incident. Their presence in her house had been sparked by Slotsky's report, and the fact that it only took a day or two meant that the RCMP were giving this more than just a passing glance. From Mom's point of view, it was clear that Dad's conduct on the highway that day and Slotsky's report painted a very negative picture. She was clearly down Dad for making some bad. She was clearly dressing down Dad for making some bad choices while I reminded her that he had been injured and only thinking about what had happened to him and how it might affect others. He also mentioned Thompson and pointed out that of the people he had interacted with, including the RCMP, Thompson proved to be the most supportive. After all, Dad said Thompson belonged to an organization that actually investigated and reported such events, so he had to have certain bona fides. And he sounded happy to have chatted with the Thompson before the RCMP interview. Mom was unconvinced and pointed out that she did not trust Thompson. There was just something about him. They had a brief exchange about Dad's prospecting and the nickel claims he had filed. Sorry. This really brought up the heat of the discussion. Dad was adamant that all his hard work would not be in vain and that he would continue pursuing his hobby now that it appeared there may be some success. Mom would hear nothing of it. Dad's hobby would end there and then, and that was that. Their conversation ended when she correctly pointed out that Dad's fears about radiation poisoning and its effect on people near him might be unfounded anyway. I found out from Mark later that day had not ended with it that Mark later that day that had not ended with the interview. Mark had taken Mom and Dad to see another doctor that day, though I discovered that this was no ordinary physician, but a radiologist who confirmed that Dad had not been injured by radioactivity. Really? They took his hat and his shirt for analysis, and they too were found to be uncontaminated. My theory that aliens had fired some kind of laser death ray at him went out the window. Based on what my father had described, the burns were caused by a jet of gases that were hot enough to set his shirt and undershirt on fire. The whole radiation scare turned out to be a big red herring in the end. So it wasn't even so on his chest, that's not even from radiation then. Despite the clean bill of health, radiation would still rear its ugly head later on. When Dad was finally able to find the site, he brought back everything he had left there on May 20th in one bag, along with a sample of soil, which did indeed show elevated radiation levels. So, naturally, everything in the bag got contaminated as well. He may have been an industrial mechanic, but he was no scientist. It was not the first time he would make a mistake that hung a cloud over the story. But he wasn't the only one who made the assumptions that muddied the tale. When traces of radiation were discovered at the site by experts, they say, who were sent there with Geiger counters, there was a flurry of activity that would later prove to be unnecessary. According to everyone who actually examined him in the medical setting and at test facilities where actual scientists worked, radiation did not harm him, make him sick, or infect him in a way that would haunt him later. Sure, there was issues with his white cell count and other factors in his blood, but the comment from one researcher that Dad had been exposed to gamma rays was not only laughable, it was absurd. So, no alien death rays. Good news for a 9-year-old. However, there was still a matter of after effects of the incident and the fact that Dad was weak, nauseated, couldn't hold down solid food, experienced headaches and fainting spells, and was losing weight. Mom figured it was about 4, maybe 5 pounds a day at this rate, and implored him to try harder while she found something that would stay down. And there was the matter of the RCMP and how they would pursue this investigation. 5 pounds a day? Can you imagine? That is incredible. That's wow. 5 pounds a day. Holy shit. He's a man. He's a man's man too. You know what I mean? Like he gets his hands dirty. He's worked in um wait, her son Mark, he was the one that is in the Air Force. This guy was in the war. And wow, 5 pounds a day. That's scary. Late into the evening, the phone rang incessantly. Mark was there. Mark is the brother, older brother than the Air Force. Mark was there for every call, fielding simple questions, but basically blowing off reporters who were intent on getting direct quotes from the victim himself, or at least, very least, his wife. Mom, of course, would have absolutely no part of it. Barry Thompson had offered to become the family spokesperson, but since he could not be there 24 hours a day, the task remained in Mark's hand. My sister Eva was the only one in our family who seemed to stay clear of the controversy and reporters. She had always been musically gifted and had a lovely voice. She was busy singing professionally at the CBC in the evenings and pursuing her arts degree during the day at the University of Manitoba. When asked if she knew this man who saw the UFO, she said she didn't know anything about UFOs, only that her father was very ill as a result of the incident. She certainly cared about what happened to her dad and the fallout it had generated, but she focused her attention on the family and her studies and gave little time to the outsiders who seemed bent on annoying us. What does it say? The ISS astronauts are able miraculously to wear cloth fiber suits with creases in this spatula vacuum. Whoa, Alberta. I did not know that. For my part, I continued to explore cutting news ways to avoid being harassed on my way to and from school. One day, my clever plans failed and I was accosted by several kids, most of them my age. A few boys were a little older. Enter my second savior. When my mother came to Canada with Mark and Eva in 1957, she was immediately thrust into the lives of the French Canadian farm families with whom my dad had found a home, employment, and friendship. That they greeted her warmly was of little consequence. She was new to this world, had no English, no real housekeeping skills, and two preteen children. In a short time, she was also pregnant with me. It was clear that life in a remote prairie village would do not, and my father wisely moved his little family to Regina. Gradually, the life of a big city agreed with her, and mom began to bloom. In a fairly short time, with the example of my dad's re-announcement of his homeland, she came to recognize that assimilation in this country meant cutting ties with Poland, other than correspondence with her family. So we rarely, if ever, spent any time searching out the Polish immigrant community. Mark fit in very quickly. My sister took longer to adapt, and I, the firstborn Canadian in the family, slipped into the life quite naturally. In Winnipeg, Dad met Henrik Lornick. Henrik Lornick, a fellow poll worker. My God, it's not a poll worker. A, a fellow Polish person who worked at the cement plant and who would later become quite an icon on the city's Polish Canadian community. Henrik's family would all contribute to the celebration of their Polish roots. He eventually co-founded Folklorama, Winnipeg's premier cultural festival. For now, we were happy to have met another Polish speaking family and spent some wonderful times with this couple and their kids who were about the same age as my brother and sister. As for me, I was happy then to be unPolish, adopting a more Canadian persona. When the language of the house was Polish, I understood, but answered in English. It was a tug of war that would continue until I discovered late in life that I truly missed celebrating that heritage. Which brings us back to my second savior. On the day I was cornered, I had no chance. We were far enough away from school, and I had made the fatal mistake of choosing a wide route home that took me close to the open field and railroad tracks that still run through the neighborhood. When confronted by several boys, I thought my goose was truly cooked. Suddenly, from nowhere, a boy several years older than any of us barged into the crowd and started swinging. Within minutes, there were kids running in all directions, while the older boy took great delight in giving them a good pound and calling out a string of obscenities in heavily accented English. His name was Jurek Bobkowski. He was a fellow Pole, yes. When it mattered and my skin was on the line, I was as Polish as all. Get out. You have your spicy ramen again, woman? Oh, so that is from an alien spacecraft, he's saying. At first, they thought it was radiation from radiation, but it wasn't. It was from it was from the ship. Like when it was, I don't even know how to explain it. It wasn't radiation though, but it was the ship was that hot. The vacuum that is the ISS astronauts take spacewalks in is considered a Tor 10 vacuum, a vacuum that instantly boils liquids. A human dressed in cloth would immediately explode. I had no idea. Pork chops with homemade mashed taters and corn on the cob. Yummy. Yeah, they were from the spaceship that he's seen. Jurek lived on my street, but much further south, almost at the end of the street, in a tiny house with his parents and little sister Deanna. This happened in oh my God, in Canada. So this is a Canadian story. He was 11 or 12, practically a teenager, and had a rough edge to him. He was a student at my school, and his English was good, but there was an accent that I found very interesting. We started using Polish between us as our own personal communication code so that others at school would not know what we were about. And as part of our ruse, he maintained a cool detachment from me at school unless I raised the alarm. He saved me that day and on other days, and not only would he continue to be there for me in the months ahead, his family and mine became good friends, even after they moved to British Columbia many years later and I lost contact with his family. His mother, Helena, stayed in touch with my mother right up until mom died in 2015. She was a tried and true friend, and for a while, Jurek was mine. It was a comfort to know that bullying might not be as a big problem as I had experienced, but the harassment never really stopped until the publicity died down years later and we resumed a fairly normal life. In time, I learned from my dad how to take care of myself in a tight spot. Mrs. Smith faded into the background and Jurek went on to high school in another province, but I will always be grateful that two saviors showed up so soon to give me a leg up on the fallout that was affecting our family. Chapter 5: The Relentless Media. Whenever I mention the day they appeared, I'm asked to what I'm referring. It's the UFOs I'm talking about. Most certainly not. Is it the UFOs I'm talking about? Most certainly not. It's the endless stream of reporters, well-wishers, uh, flim-flam artists, odd folks, interested parties, government agency representatives, the authorities, investigators of all types, and just simple nutcases who washed up on our doorstep like a never-ending tsunami. On the flip side, we made some long-lasting friendships with people who were aware of the notoriety of my father and had attracted, but chose to be supportive and enjoy the company of our family, regardless of how they may have felt about what Dad had endured of what was at the source of it. One such couple was Marty and June McGregor, Jurek's father, a local architect, introduced them to my family. Marty and his wife enlarged our family social circle in a very meaningful way. They were not of Polish descent, far from it. Marty, a professional engineer, was very interested in Dad's story and chose to take a pragmatic approach. Rather than blindly believe the encounter had been extraterrestrial, he was interested in the physical aspects of it and the effect it had on Dad and my family. In the months and years to come, Marty and June became good friends, and Marty was often the voice of reason and caution when events tumbled along at a rate my father was not prepared to handle. Reporters continued to dog our steps. The steps of our house were littered with spent flash bulbs that Mark collected and threw in the trash. I was followed to school one day by a man who was very insistent that I speak to him about Dad, as if what I had to say in the matter was remotely newsworthy. It was only when I crossed into the schoolyard that he wisely chose to back off. It is important to remember the era in which the case occurred. There were no home computers, no digital cameras, and no portable recording devices. Newspaper reporters came armed with pads and pencils, usually with photographers in tow, who were determined to get a shot of Dad or anyone else who poked their head out our front door or pulled aside the living room curtains. As for TV news, the equipment required to do an on site interview filled a small van. It was rare to have a TV crew show up unannounced. They quickly discovered that the amount of work required to set up a location shoot only to get nothing from it wasn't worth the effort. We had such an invasion, but only once. I remember watching Mark one evening as he gathered to go coffee cups, cigarette butts, and other litter from the front lawn after an all day vigil by one of our local TV stations. Earth's atmosphere isn't contained. There's no barrier between the air we breathe and the infinite vacuum of outer space. Thank you for expressing your knowledge. At first, Dad was willing to cooperate and tell a story. As I sat in my stairwell, I heard debates between my parents about which TV station was worthy or which reporter deserved to get an audience. Our relationship with the Winnipeg Tribune had surpassed Heather Chisbin and now included Peter Warren, a man who would one day become a well-known, if not well-loved, radio talk show host. Trading on the relationship already established the fact that the Tribune had carried the initial story, warned convinced Dad that a one-on-one interview was the best thing to take the story to the next level. Warren wanted more on the man at the center of this storm. Yeah, remember to go into live chat. Within days of the first story, Warren had Dad meet him at the St. Regis Hotel where he booked a private room. It was anonymous, neutral ground, and the two were sequestered for some time. I recall seeing how incredibly tired Dad was when the taxi brought him home. The follow up stories that appeared were, in my family's estimation, fairly well balanced. Although, like with anything the media did at the time, there were many gaps in the information about what kind of person my father was. And the quotes Warren chose were tailored to fit the narrative. Warren became a staunch defender of Dad's story largely because on that day interview, it seems the things they talked about that did not make the final cut were significant enough for Warren to form a strong opinion. Years later, Warren would go on record to say that he believed the man he had interviewed, not necessarily that the incident involved extraterrestrial visitors, but that Dad was telling the truth. The events happened as he described them. It's a pity the articles didn't fully explore that part of their conversation. Mark's vigilance went way beyond day-to-day visitations. In those first few weeks, other news agencies began to hover. We were pestered by phone calls at all hours. First, it was the local news, papers, radio, and TV. Then the story was being picked up nationally, then internationally. The big three American networks all chimed in, NBC, CBS, and ABC. One night, the phone rang, and Mark answered the way all people do when they get calls at 3 a.m. by asking if the caller knew what time it was. It was the BBC. Our little story had made it overseas. Naturally, all this media attention reached the desks of news agencies. As a kid, I couldn't fathom the effects of a story of these proportions and the number of variety of people who would be reading it. It did not take very long for authorities to step in. Chapter 6: RCMP officers visit often. Have you heard of this story before, Alberta? Okay, Alberta. I was just asking if you've seen this or heard of this story before. But Stephen McCulloch, he's the one that was burned with the spaceship. When I was in school on Wednesday, the RCMP came back to our house in an interview that lasted the afternoon. Corporal Davis calmly and methodically walked Dad through all of the events of the Tory Day long weekend while a tape recorder ran. I remember seeing Davis for the first time that day when I came home from school. I caught only a brief portion of the conversation after the formal part of the interview had ended and from my spot on the landing. I realized I had missed a good deal. It was frustrating that I had to go to school while all the really interesting things happened outside my watch. I liked Davis from the moment I was briefly introduced. He was tall and good looking. My mother commented more than once that he was a handsome man, and a sentiment that went over the head of a simple 9-year-old. I did note that he was what I considered the epitome of a Mountie. Ramrod straight, slim, with a soft spoken voice that came out in measured phrases. He seemed kind and considerate, and was very gracious with Mom, who served him coffee and dainties while he interviewed Dad. In the weeks to come, I looked forward to seeing him and always asked whether he would be joining the groups of people who gathered at our house on the seemingly endless expeditions to Falcon Lake. What I could not know then was that the RCMP already had a growing file on my father. It had started the day of the incident when Dad approached the RCMP on the highway near Falcon Lake. Constable Solotsky of the Falcon Beach detachment had already filed an incident report, and after the story made the paper, it was probably hustled up the administrative chain to the D Division headquarters of the RCMP in Winnipeg, which sent Davis and Zacharias for a follow-up interview on Tuesday and prompted this revisit today. The initial report by Solotsky did not become available to us until years later. Based on their discussions yesterday and today, it seemed that Davis was intent on clarifying the conclusions that Solotsky had reached in his initial report. That day may have been drunk. That Dad may have been drunk. There was too much information being withheld. that there was perhaps more to this than met the eye. When I finally did read the report many years later, it was clear that Solutki had very little regard for the strange man who had flagged him down on the highway. The subsequent RCMP reports were much more thorough and balanced, and even though they were carefully pointed on the mistakes Dad made throughout the investigation, there was really nothing in them to disprove the events of that day in May. That the RCMP appeared serious about the case and was willing to put the time that was obvious by the number of visits officers made to that house. We saw a lot of Davis and Zacharias over the 2 weeks to come. They were back on Thursday and anxious for Dad to take them to Falcon Lake and revisit the site. My clandestine listening and confirmed that Mom was adamant that Dad cooperate as fully as possible, though she repeated her concern that he was in no shape to go gallivanting off into the bush on any kind of trek with anyone. It was a position confirmed by Dr. Otway, who told the RCMP that my father was not well enough yet to accompany them to Falcon Lake. For this part, Dad was willing to assist. Something in his character demanded that he respect the authority of our federal police force. But Barry Thompson cautioned him about doing so in the face of being charged by police. Thompson had somehow convinced Dad that he needed an advocate, someone who could shield him from any attempts by any authority to disprove his claims, or worse, to find him liable for mischief, and that he, Thompson, was the man for the job. My evening listening sessions revealed to me that a problem was developing. Dad firmly defended what Thompson was proposing, claiming that this man had his best interests at heart. My mom was not so sure, and in the months ahead, it became increasingly more difficult to determine which one of the dozens of people involved could be trusted, believed, or relied on. And in the end, she stated categorically that the well being of the family came first. Her argument clearly touched a nerve. When the war broke out in Poland in 1939, Dad was serving with the intelligence section of the military police. His beat took him to the eastern reaches of the country along the Polish-Ukrainian border, where he was responsible for uncovering covert activities by elements of pro-Soviet fifth columnists who were being smuggling arms and generally becoming a nuisance in good order and discipline. He came from a police and military family. His father was chief of police in the small town in which he was born. The make-believe off-limit continent, Antarctica. Beyond the wall are several hundred continents. See the Iron Republic. Aliens are indeed alien systems. When hostilities opened with Nazi Germany in the military and was assailed from both sides, the German juggernaut in the west and the growing menace of communist Russia from the east, once regular Polish army had been defeated, serving members went underground and started factions of partisans to fight the Nazi occupiers. It would have been a very simple prospect, except that there were two wings of partisans operating in occupied Poland. The home army, loyal to the Polish government, in exile and composed of ex-army members, and the People's Army, communist supporters who were armed and organized by Soviet Russia. Dad's loyalty was tested throughout the war, but he never wavered. Even when it was discovered that his father had been one of tens of thousands of Poles who had been arrested by the Soviets and who perished either in the labor camps of Siberia or in a mass execution in the east of Poland. Dad believed in loyalty and honor. When the Allies defeated Nazi Germany in 1945 and my father was released after a year and a half in the Gross Roden concentration camp, he remained an active operative for the exiled Polish government, this time targeting the Soviets who had invaded from the east and liberated Poland. The country was now a Soviet state, and the government in exile declared irrelevant, and any member of the home army who was not prepared to toe the party line was considered an outlaw and hunted down. In this post-war mess, Dad began to question his blind loyalty to a country that had given up everything for which he stood. His one escape from the political pressure of the time was his marriage to my mother, who survived 14 months in Ravensbrück concentration camp. I couldn't even imagine. Oh my gosh. They had met through her father, a man Dad had been instrumental in saving from the Nazi death squads. They married in 1946, and the birth of my sister a year later seemed to indicate that somehow a normal life was possible. It was not to be. The Soviets' regimented brutality in the immediate post-war years put Dad on a constant collision course with capture, internment, or worse. So in 1948, he escaped from Poland, knowing my mother was pregnant with their second child, and made his way into Allied occupied Germany, where he was absorbed into the US Army as a former partisan. It was his ticket to North America. 9 years later, his wife and children and family would get the chance to be reunited with him in his new home, Canada. Here is, it says, a photo, my mother and father's wedding portrait in Poland following World War II. Sorry, it's so hard to show. That's them. His obedience to authority had been tested in a way most people could not possibly understand. While he always showed the preached respect for the law, and most specifically the foot soldiers of the law and the RCMP officers, he began to get a sense that what had happened to him at Falcon Lake and its follow put him under a microscope, and that the so-called authorities were not treating him as a victim, but as a suspect. The investigation into the UFO incident started to feel like an investigation of my dad, not the events that he honestly and naively reported. What was black and white to him took on a multiple levels of gray that he was not equipped to handle. It didn't take long for his suspicions to be aroused and encouraged by others who had more cynical agendas. The dilemma could not be more clear. As he saw it, something bad had happened. He had been injured. The nature of the threat was unknown. It had to be reported to the proper authorities. Incidents would have to be warned. He would require treatment. Those authorities would have to step in, and he could be content knowing he had done his citizen's duty. Unfortunately, life and people were not so simple. The storm he had initiated would just get worse for him and for his family. Some may have turned to religion at times like this. We were a Catholic family and regular churchgoers, although Dad had pulled away from any formal church activities. We still went on most Sundays and, of course, at Christmas and Easter. My sister sang in the choir, and since the church was elementary school were connected, I had my confirmation ceremony there. St. John Brebeuf Church is a stunning architectural work that was completed in the year we arrived in Winnipeg. It is still an awesome church to visit. While we all drifted away from the church years later, our faith was never really abandoned. Perhaps our individual needs were satisfied in other ways. Eva left for Toronto in 1971 with a scholarship to study singing at the University of Toronto's faculties of music, while Mark moved to Ontario in the 80s with his young family and became very active in the United Church. My mother remained a true believer until she died, and my sister and I pursued our spirituality in different ways. However, in 1967, we did not turn to the church as a family to help us through these trials. Perhaps we should have. Here's a picture. It says, my father on the left with members of the family with whom he stayed in Saskatchewan after coming to Canada in 1949. I'll put them in my community tab so you guys can look at these photos. I'm just going to stop there. We're on chapter 7. I just want to see if there's anything on YouTube about this. There is an interview.
Holy shit.
I just want to see this. So I'm going to share my screen. It's 8 minutes. So it's called 1967 Canada UFOB. Stephen McCulloch was attacked at Falcon Lake.
50-year-old Polish immigrant and amateur geologist Stephen Mahalik looked forward to his weekend getaways alone in the Falcon Lake area, 90 miles east of his home in Winnipeg, Manitoba. This was Mahalik's favorite prospecting site. Around noon on May 20th, 1967, as he examined a quartz formation, Mahalik was distracted by some unruly geese. He looked up and was transfixed. He says he saw two cigar-shaped objects glowing red in the sky. The following is a recording Mahalik later made of what he saw next.
The size, was amazing. And here they're coming down. With speed, I just can't describe. Amazing speed.
Mahalik says one of them stopped, suddenly accelerated, then disappeared. The other landed about 50 yards away. He watched in awe.
I hear shh, and I hear a high-pitched whistle of running equipment. Pumps on high speed. When the tank landed, it was of gray pink color. It's stainless steel, and it was pink hot. And I could feel the breeze on my face that thing is hot outside.
There was my notebook. There was my pencil.
That's good though that he decided he was going to draw it because he didn't have a camera or anything, right? So this was what, 1967 when this happened. And I think the story is just incredible.
So I sketched it.
Mahalik claims it was round, about 40 feet long and about 10 feet high. His curiosity took hold and he approached the craft. He examined the outside of it, slowly touching the glowing skin with his gloved hand. It was fiery hot, nearly melting the palm of his rubber glove. Mahalik says the craft rotated, turning its grid-like exhaust vent toward him. The blast of hot gas from the vent knocked him to the ground, setting his shirt and undershirt on fire. The craft suddenly lifted off the ground, according to Mahalik, and soared straight up. He threw his burning shirts to the ground.
So I don't know if you're still in here, Alberta, but it wasn't from radiation. So the spots was from the blast off when it went to go back up into the sky. And it was not radiation. And it turns out that it actually wasn't. But there's still contamination at that spot at the time when they went to look back. But apparently he didn't suffer radiation burns, which we thought.
Dazed and in severe pain from burns to his chest and stomach. Mahalik says he wandered around for what seemed like hours before he managed to gather up his supplies. He found his way out of the woods, caught a bus, and later that night arrived back in Winnipeg. Still in pain, he rushed from the bus station to nearby Misericordia Hospital, where he was treated for first-degree burns. Mahalik claimed the...
There it is. That's insane. So that's what it looks like. Four across, 5 down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Unless that might be one. No, I don't think so. It's like a vent. During the early 1940s, the dominant political party of the United States was the Democratic Party. During the time, the dominant political party of Germany was a nationalist. Germany declared war on the United States. The United States officially entered the war. Hey, Navajo. And I like that it's Canadian too. I don't do a lot of Canadian things on here. They were not Nazi shield. Okay.
Blast from the craft had etched a grid-like pattern into his abdomen that matched the pattern on the exhaust vent. The next day, Sunday, he was spirited off to the St. Regis Hotel after convincing the managing editor of Winnipeg's highly regarded daily newspaper, the Winnipeg Tribune, that his extraordinary encounter was real.
At that time, I said, okay, as any newsman would have done, draw it. I gave him a piece of paper. I think that drawing has become the most famous UFO drawing has become the most famous. I gave him a piece.
Wow. Look at there's that vent thing right there. So when it went to took off, it lost a hot air came out and burned him. It actually caught on fire, his shirt and undershirt. Wow, I don't even know how and he's been sick ever since.
Of paper. I think that drawing has become the most famous UFO piece of evidence in the world today. He sat down, he drew it in front of me. I hid it. I talked to him. I called doctors. I called police. And I sure as hell didn't want the Winnipeg Free Press getting the story.
Monday's edition of the Tribune led with this headline: Mahalik soon became a sensation worldwide. What followed was one of the most intensely examined UFO cases on record. Over the next 2 years, Mahalik's burns kept recurring, and no...
Sorry, I just want to check this out. His burns kept reoccurring. Look at them there. They're like connected here. There's still circles. How do they keep
Occurring, and no one could explain why. He was examined by more than a dozen physicians in Canada and the United States.
He's gonna check chat. I feel like massive burns would make some sick, even if not radiation. Yeah, and he was very, very sick. They said that it wasn't caused, absolutely not caused from radiation. Those burns, and that he didn't have radiation poisoning. So why was he so sick then? Especially since burns often lead to infections and even blood infections and dehydration. Yeah,
Including doctors at the Mayo Clinic. An investigation by the Royal Canadian Air Force concluded that the abdominal burns sustained by Mr. Mahalik remain as unexplainable as to the source of the burn. The Mayo Clinic psychological report concluded that Mahalik was not prone to delusions, hallucinations, or any type of emotional disorder. Perhaps the most influential investigation was conducted under the auspices of the United States government. The chief investigator, physicist Roy Craig, is now retired and raises llamas on his Colorado ranch. His job was to examine UFO reports and find physical evidence.
We responded to the Falcon Lake report as soon as we could. Now, there's no value in seeing a landing site that somebody's had a chance to go back and prepare for me to look at. But if we could get back and find a landing site that had not been seen by anyone else or been altered by human beings, there may be something there that we could use as real evidence that he had a real experience.
they did go back though, and I'm pretty sure I just read that they went back and there was the stuff that the victim Stephen had left behind because he was out prospecting. He was looking for crystals and stuff, right? And he left all his gear and went to catch a bus to go home. So he left his stuff behind. So that was contaminated with radiation. It's crazy, but he wasn't.
I mean, comparable with the appearance of human beings on Earth.
2 weeks after the encounter, Craig flew to Winnipeg and joined Mahalik on his first return to the landing site.
He guided us on what he said was a big search for the site. Actually, we just roamed around in haphazard circles, coming back to about where we started and didn't go very far at all. He was trying to give us the impression of leading us on a search for a site. And we all concluded
What?
that the site probably did not exist.
With no
Whoa. What an asshole.
And we all concluded that the site probably did not exist.
With no apparent physical evidence, Craig classified the case as without merit.
Okay, but what about what I just read in the book? That all his stuff was left behind and they tested it and it had radiation on it. Huh.
The American investigation was over.
That's why it's American. Probably.
University of Manitoba astronomer Chris Rutkowski, believing the government reports left many questions unanswered, launched his own investigation. In 1994, he published The Falcon Lake Case, Too Close an Encounter, in the respected Journal of UFO Studies.
The terrain around the site is very rugged, very rocky. The brush is very, very dense. The trees all look alike. The rocks all look alike. And to a person who's disoriented, not feeling very well, it might be very...
He's the one that helped write this book with Stephen's son, Stan. So it's by Stan McCulloch and Chris Rutkowski. Yeah.
very, very difficult to find the exact site after some period of time has elapsed.
Skeptics, disagreeing with Rutkowski, also do not believe that Mahalik
I haven't finished the whole book yet, so I have lots of questions. Just reading up on it, it turns out that the burned areas are sensitive to sunlight, and the recurring burns could be due to essentially sunburn triggered with less sun than the rest of his skin. Soil has naturally radiation too, so yeah, that's true. Yeah. I don't know, just his story is Tarot Destroyer. To achieve world government, it is necessary to move from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family. To I don't know if these are trolls or not. They're not being like rude or anything. I'm just whatever. I'm just leaving them.
would make physical contact with an extremely hot object he assumed was a UFO. But this does not surprise his son.
He is the kind of fellow that fear
Oh, there's
is
the guy.
not in his vocabulary.
So that's who I'm reading in his words for this whole book here. That's who it is.
Not that he's a fearless man. but that when he sees something he doesn't understand, he doesn't fear it. He just chooses to understand it.
Skeptics wonder why no one else saw the craft.
I talked with the people who were in charge of managing the fire tower. It was manned at that time. And the people were absolutely certain that there was no way that two vehicles like he described.
How many times has even like, you know, they like even oh my God, what do you call them? The towers and stuff, they never talk about if there was actually UFO or not. It's not public knowledge. They won't tell you anyway. So yeah, sure, call them up, ask them. They're not going to tell you the truth.
Glowing as they were, could fly into that space and out again. There was no way that that could happen without their seeing it.
I wonder if they were seeking gems or minerals. They use gems for energy to transport. Yeah, that's what somebody was saying in the beginning of the book. In the book, it says that too. That maybe that's why they stopped there was for fuel. It's not that I want to completely shut him down. I believe weird shit happens. I just also like to look. No, it's good to be skeptical. Absolutely. I think when we finish the book, we'll get a really, you know, good idea of what all happened. That's what I thought too. I was like, I wonder if they're using, you know, because he was prospecting. So I'm wondering if he used, you know, what was in the earth for fuel. Teddy Roosevelt said that in politics, nothing happens by accident. If it happens, it was planned that way. Oh, I believe it.
My conclusion on that case is that all the evidence that I found
There's his undershirt.
pointed toward hoax rather than a real experience. And not even a skillful hoax, a very inept hoax.
Mahalik became bedridden and incapacitated in the 1980s. Was this hardworking and devoted family man capable of crafting such a hoax?
In the 80s, yeah, this happened in 67.
My dad to fabricate something as large as this would require more than I think he had, more than he has. He's a simple man. He grew up and lived a very straight, hard life.
This was no con man. This was a man who later went down a Mayo. They couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure it out. The doctor I had there couldn't figure it out. I am not about to be taken by anybody. This guy didn't take me. This guy was legit.
Shit, do you hear that? Even doctors are getting pissed off. Missing 401 does also contain a story of a prospector who was essentially immobile, who disappeared with no reasonable explanation. Really? I should look that up after this.
Stephen Mahalik never wavered from his story. He believed he had encountered a UFO. Roy Craig and the US government disagreed, but they never classified the case as solved. The official report lists Mahalik's sighting as unexplained.
Feet, really? Yeah, it was on Unsolved Mysteries too. If you guys want to watch it, it's on YouTube. That's where I first heard about it. Ray goes, pet my cat. Oh. You furry freak, you. I can't remember the names. A friend took him out to go rock hunting. Man could not walk. Friend was mere feet away, and the man disappeared. No signs of animal attack. Wow. Let me see if there's anything on it. I don't know if this is it.
Are you ready to discover the secret to affordable premium smokes? Tired of spending an arm and a leg for...
Hey there, friends. Dave Flightis, K&M Missing Project, a copyrighted edition for our video channel. Thanks for being here. And this was the keynote speaker at their national conference this year. More responses from MUFON members saying, Dave, your books are refreshing because you cite facts and don't give opinion. Thank you. I appreciate when people recognize that. Well, in this month's, and that would be November 2023, in this month's MUFON Journal, they had a case that I talked about before, but I didn't know this one aspect about it until I read this article in the journal, and I'll read part of it to you to let you understand what was said. On October 11th, 1973, two fishermen were on the Pascagoula River in Mississippi. They were to catch more than just fish that.
Yeah, I don't know which one it is. But there's these missing 401 with David here. Oh, it's crazy too, because these people that disappear are never found, or they're found alive and well with stories like, oh, I already talked to you, say Uncle Mark, and you told me that they were expecting me for dinner over here at the house. So I went to go have dinner, and they think they literally went to go have dinner with all their family members there. Meanwhile, they were missing for a month. It's like, what? Yeah. I can't remember. I must have seen it on this channel, that one.
Prince, who runs the Ocean Springs, Mississippi Historical Society. Miss Prince had an interest in the 73 encounter, and she informed me that a number of the Historical Society had just donated 2 full body items. Her parents bought Hickson's house when he died, and these papers were left in it. Miss Fayard had these 2 boxes.
Missing 401, blah, blah, missing 401, the UFO connection. Yeah, the people that disappeared under impossible circumstances, but would turn up at impossible, like in a damn bear cave when they weren't even anywhere around it. Whoa, what is this?
What the? Dude, holy shit!
I remember that one.
Number 1.
They thought it was a witch.
After hearing rumors about a huge mountain lion wandering around his area, a guy decided to try and attract it. He set up one of his trail cameras and hung a bag of old meat scraps as bait. However, instead of the mountain lion, someone unexpected appeared in the footage. The person in the video seemed homeless, and it's creepy because the guy's home is in a really isolated place, practically crossed. Anyway, the person who posted the video mentioned that they checked the area afterward and found fallen trees deliberately blocking the trailhead. I highly doubt someone would be out there doing that in such bad weather. Number 3.
So you think you know Wix, but do you really? First up,
a Reddit user named Coldgate111 shared a creepy video sending chills down the spines of the online community. The footage, supposedly taken at the well-known campsite B08, shows something quite spooky. You can hear eerie sounds of the outdoors, and if you look closely, you'll spot a pair of eyes peering.
Oh, okay, this is not what I thought it would be. Trevor Basil is a recent prospector who went missing, even though his rocks were found. Not the case I was thinking of. Okay. I don't know, I really, really, really enjoy books like this. They're so interesting. There's another one I have called Communion. I'm gonna read that one next, I believe. Following all of this because I don't know, I'm just interested. Always have been. I'm terrified, but I'm interested. Right after you Google. All right, I'm probably gonna go off here. I can see what my son and his girlfriend are doing. Nothing bad. Kidding, they're good. I'll be back tomorrow. I'm gonna read this until it's done, just like I did the other book. So about this much through. Not quite half. But I'll be back tomorrow. I'll read every night at 7, except for Wednesdays. Wednesdays I go live on my channel with Beta and Megan. So that'll be fun. What's today? Sunday, right? Okay, yeah, so Monday and Tuesday. You guys have a great night. Thank you for joining me. And welcome, new people. Have a good night, guys. Bye.
I know you told your friend you're not okay. And tell me what's wrong and why you never said you felt that way. And guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away. But I've known you too long.